Hello and welcome to our first webinar in the BTC webinar series. My name is Georgia and I'll be your moderator today. Throughout the series, we'll cover various topics pertaining to the research industry, including operations, financial services, technology, and more. We invite and encourage experts from sponsors and CROs, sites, vendors, and health professionals to attend and present in our webinars in order to help promote learning, idea exchange, and progress. We enjoy hearing input from our audience and would like to include your voice in the conversation. So feel free to ask questions using the question and answer panel in the GoToWebinar sidebar. You can ask questions at any time, and we will address questions at the end of the presentation if time permits. All questions will also be answered in a follow-up blog post on the BTC Network website. Today's speaker is Al Peters. Al has over 12 years of experience in the clinical research field. He is one of the founders of Beacon Clinical Research, a multi-specialty research facility in Massachusetts, and is currently the president of BTC Network. His expertise proves very useful when undergoing business development plans, site growth, marketing campaigns, and study contracts and budgets. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Al to begin.
Thanks for that introduction, Georgia. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. As Georgia said, just to give a quick introduction, I'm the president of our BTC network. We're located in Massachusetts. We have an office in Lewis Wharf up in Boston, Massachusetts, and we have an office in Canton, Mass. And just to tell you a little bit more about myself, so I did start in the industry about maybe 15 years ago now. I started on the site side. I'm sure there's a lot of site specialists, if you will, on the call right now that'll understand where I'm coming from. And I started as a coordinator. I had a background in business, but I didn't really, to be honest with you, I never had an MBA or anything along those lines, or even any type of healthcare degree. But I started off as a coordinator, and more of an assistant coordinator, and I worked at a multi-specialty site. I did everything from diabetes studies to pain to neuropathic pain, whether it's PHN or diabetic neuropathy, vaccine trials, and I wore the hat of a coordinator, which is, many different roles at the site. You're doing everything from obviously coordinating the visits to creating the source to changing the light bulbs, even if you have to. So I started off there, and then I slowly grew and learned regulatory, and then you start wearing the hat at the small sites of helping with contract and budgets. And from then I went on to more of the director role and more of the strategic alliance with the PIs, and really trying to help fine-tune all the variables at the site level, which is a very delicate model. And it's one of the reasons I love my job. I have a lot of respect for the site side. It's I really think there's no other business in the world like it, where there's so many different variables. But with that said, it's the chances of losing money at the site level, is higher than other industries because there's so many different components, and it's a very delicate model. So today we're going to talk a lot about budgets and about finances, and it's becoming more and more important as our profit margin, if you will, is shrinking at the site side. So it's something that we're trying to help sites with, and we're excited to talk about it. So with that, I'm going to kick off the presentation. We have a 1 hour planned. I could talk about a lot of this for 4 hours, probably without even scratching the surface. So our team and my partner, we put together a high-level presentation, and the idea is to really get out a high volume of just educational material. So if I'm talking fast and stuttering, and it's because I'm from Boston and that's the way we talk. And but the goal is just to get a lot of really a lot out to the sites. One of the things about the sites and us is there's really no class on this, but the budgets are established by a group of sites starting to implement change in their budget, and I'm going to talk more about that. But so that's why we think it's so important to really continue to educate, and this is a service that, by the way, we do in-house. So if you ever want to outsource it to us, feel free to do that. We would love to partner with you. So again, today we're going to touch on contract and budgets. I'm going to touch on a little bit of the contract language and indemnification language and some other insurance language within the contracts, but we're not going to get too deep. I'm going to talk about paying physicians and different models on how you can pay your physicians. I'm also going to talk about receivable management, and we're going to touch on renegotiation and maintaining relationships and communications with coordinators and kind of all the different things that that seem to get lost in the shuffle at the site side, but that will really help you maximize value. And again, that bottom line is what we're looking at. So a lot of sites, they have 10%, 15%, 20% profit margin. And by executing any one of these three criteria wrong, you can easily wipe out your profit margin. So it's something it's where we want it to start. We're going to try to have a little bit of extra time at the end to collaborate and to share ideas as well, so I'll do my best to go fast. Okay, a few areas of discussion on the budget. I'm going to talk about a few tips. We're going to talk about a few tools needed to succeed. So obviously that's your protocol, your time and event schedule, really knowing your time and event schedule. But we're going to touch more on that in future slides. I'm going to talk about the importance of establishing the per study budget. And by that I mean a per procedure budget as opposed to a per visit budget. So we'll talk about that. We're going to discuss some of the pass-through fees and talk about how really hedging your future risk on being exposed to lost time is so important through your pass-through fees and then your renegotiation. We're going to discuss screen failures, and I'm going to provide a few strategies on maximizing your screen fail reimbursement, and also how careful you're going to be on your screen fail negotiations. That's definitely a component that we'd like to see escalated to the sponsor if it's being denied, just because of the importance of it. We'll discuss clinical trial agreements. I am not an attorney. I don't pretend to be one, and a lot of times I defer to our attorney for the language. But there's some of the main components of the clinical trial agreement. As a contract and budget specialist, you should be learning, in my opinion. You should know indemnification language and a few other things, which I'm going to get into. We'll talk a little bit about partnership agreements, though we might not have time to get into that too much. So contract and budgets 101. Profit margins are decreasing. So you have to verify your budget is fair and reasonable. So how do you do that? First of all, you have to know your protocol. You have to read the protocol. You have to know the procedures that are occurring at every single visit. You have to know the time that's involved in all of your scales. And you have to price up your budget on a per procedure basis. If you don't have a previous coordinating background, that's okay. Just the big thing is that the budgetary person or the person that's pricing up the budget needs to loop in the coordinator or the director or whoever knows the clinical side to verify time and verify that the procedures are correct. Always do your due diligence when pricing up the budget. Again, the worst thing that we see is a budgetary team that receives a budget and then just prices it up based on a 30% increase and sends it back. That's not correct. You should receive the budget, you should receive the time and events schedule and the protocol, and then you should price up your budget like you never received the budget. See where you come in at without even looking at what they offered you first, just to make sure that they're even in the same ballpark. Does building a relationship with your sponsor or CRO help? The answer to that is yes. It's not maybe, it's 100% yes. One thing that we do with our process is a lot of times with our first negotiation, we call the contact and we have a talk with them. We say, hey, Joe, where are you at with your budget? Obviously this budget's way lower than what we can do on site. Where have you seen some of the other sites coming in at? You'd be surprised over the amount of intel that you'll receive without even sending that first demand on your side. So you're kind of, you're not bidding against yourself. You're using that intel to maximize your first request. And then you can touch on things like local advertising and screen fail ratios and other things that they've seen. A lot of times the person on the other end will, they want to speed it up anyways. So make that first call. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the relationship in future slides, but you always want to be fair, be nice, but yet be stern and be aggressive. But, having a poor relationship or any type of a negative rapport with the guy on the other end is not going to help you get more money out of them. There's a way to be nice but still demand where you need to be. So that delicate balance is very important. Think big picture. Always think big picture. We're going to get into the per procedure budget a little bit more, and but when you're negotiating your budget, you're going to have your total budget that your goal is going to be, including all the procedures. Well, if they're reimbursing you for a lower amount for the physical exam, but there's a higher amount for your vitals or a scale, and you're ending where you want to be, that's okay. Again, think big picture. Don't worry about the line items. For every action, there's a reaction. So you do not want to lowball your budgets. I'm going to I touched on it in our introduction, but as being on the site side, we're one group together, and the range that is established and the precedent that's established in the budgetary culture and environment at the sponsor level is set by us. We set it. We set it with our demands, our requests, where we give in. And that's something that I feel is extremely important as sites, that we really need to know that. So by approving low budgets and not doing our due diligence, we're affecting each other. Sponsors and CROs will absolutely increase their range or their screen fail ratio or their payment terms, to reflect what the consensus is. And on our end, we should be requesting what's fair and reasonable for our time, for our risk, so that we hit that profit margin at the end of the day for the, that's so important for us to run our businesses, or our institutions, if that's the model that we're a part of. New sites, if you had know any new sites, I see them at investigator meetings all the time, share your budgetary secrets. It's not, this isn't patented secrets, and it only helps you. You want the sites requesting, newer sites requesting right away what they should be. So help them out, help them with the pass-through fees, show them how to price up budgets. Again, it's going to help us all in the long run. Don't start the job without your tools. So the big key one here is, again, you need the protocol. You need to know what the heck you're doing at each visit. You absolutely need to know which vendors are being paid for. I see a lot of times, a lot of sites where they negotiate the budget and then they find out that there's a local lab needed down the line, and they're including that negotiation point down the line after they've done tons of work. So you lose leverage. You lose leverage down the line once you start to study, once you've gotten a lot going. You could argue that you gain some leverage if you've enrolled patients, but the goal is to get it all up front. So know your labs, know your vendors, know your diagnostics, and make sure that your pass-through fees are itemized out accordingly. If the sponsor provides the budget on a per-visit basis, that's the new negotiation tactic, or I shouldn't say not new, but new within the last 4 years, where they provide it on a per-visit basis. And it's funny when we get it, and you call the guy on the other end, you say, well, how do I know that this is reasonable? And they say, well, that's the model they're using. It's on a per-visit basis. Then you say, well, okay, how do I know that the value for all the procedures that are being performed is on par with what I need at my institution? It doesn't matter. They won't give you a per procedure budget. That's the answer on the other end. So regardless, you got to price it up on your own end. You got to set up an Excel spreadsheet that you list out the procedures, and you establish a value for every procedure. I know we're going to talk after the presentation, but if anybody needs any tools on per subject budgets, or paying physicians when we get into that, or any tools at all, or any ideas on CTMS systems, which we'll get into in a little bit, feel free to reach out to me. I'll get back to you early next week, or I can connect you with the correct team member as well. Again, we want to, the goal of this is to educate us as sites. Make sure you include your PI fee and your coordinator fee, as well as your overhead amount and your patient stipend amount in every single per procedure budget that you price up. So you really want to make sure that you're including all those in. we were going to dive into pricing up a budget, but we're going to push that off to another presentation just based on the fact today that we're trying to stay high level on all the financial components. But again, feel free to attend any future webinars on actually pricing up the budget. We have a per procedure list and a range of reimbursement for those procedures that we can help share with you guys as well. My director of finance would be angry at me if I shared that, if I told you guys that, but the reality is we definitely want to share it with, so that we're all kind of on similar pages. And again, if you see anything there that you think is off, let us know and we'll adjust on our end. Startup fees and other pass-throughs. This is a few of them. So your reimbursable startup fee, again, for us, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 we might start. Non-reimbursable startup fee. So the reimbursable startup fee is typically you would take out of future grant payments as well. So you can structure that as like, for instance, 2 completed patients or 1 completed patient. It helps with the initial cash flow. And again, the way to structure your payment back to them would be maybe they, out of your first grant payment, they would take 50% back. Out of your second grant payment, they would take another 50% back. But this is a loan to get you through up to that first grant payment. We recommend going for it. I think that does help with startup cash flow. Non-reimbursable startup fees. So what does that cover? It covers things like, your feasibility completion, your SIV visit. There's a lot of hidden costs in regards to the time we're starting up a protocol. Your pharmacy fee, that's for making your drug accountability logs, so on and so forth. We typically request $1,500 to $2,500 up front. Some of these other ones I'm going to move a little quicker over, but your archiving fee, your investigator meeting fee, your SAE fee. So anybody that's a coordinator on the line is going to know what that's for. But so your time associated with processing a serious adverse event. Again, you got to request medical records. You have to submit the notification to the IRB. You have to notify the sponsor. You got to process your EDC. You got to follow up for additional medical records, and etc. So your SAE fee, I don't know, maybe you request $500 to $1,000 per SAE. Unscheduled visit fee, we always try to structure on a per procedure basis. Make sure you include your overhead, your PI fee, and your coordinator fee. Your protocol amendment fee. So your protocol amendment fee is for processing any amendments. There's tons of regulatory time that's associated with your protocol amendments. So it could be anywhere from $650 to maybe $1,500 per protocol. Your reconsent fee, obviously that's for reconsenting patients. Audit fee. Our audit fees we try to structure on a per day basis. So we try to structure that, maybe it's $1,500 or $2,000 per day. Then you have your local advertising and your IND safety report. There's a whole bunch of other startup fees and pass-through fees that you can definitely include. There's a chart review fee that we see approved a lot now, and a patient recruitment fee where they give you a bucket of hours to really, set aside to hit your own database. And yeah, definitely think outside the box with this, because it's about minimizing your exposed risk down the line, and then also helping us, like I said, as an industry, just reestablish a certain precedents now. One other thing I want to say with this is, and even with the per subject budget, make sure you're not requesting your ending value. The old saying is shoot for the stars, you're going to hit the moon. With negotiations, especially budget negotiations, that philosophy absolutely should be applied. You have to request higher, 30, 40% higher than where you want to land. Be nice about it, be respectful, explain the reasoning, explain the historical studies that you've done, but make sure you come at them high, and you want to have your poker face on. Even if you're on a call with them, you want to make sure that you tell them how serious this is, but you got to be reimbursed reasonably, and then let them go laugh at you a little bit and then come back. You'll end up ending a lot higher and probably where you need to be. Screen failures. Always provide reasons and examples for your request. So I touched on it in the previous slide, but things like, based on the last PHN study I did, the diary scale excluded a lot of patients, and give your reasonings. Really dive into the protocol, depending on the therapeutic indication that you work in. You always want to request the total amount of the actual visits. So, for example, if we see more and more run-in phases where they're trying to weed out placebo responses and other exclusionary components, well, if a patient's not randomized till visit 5, and they can screen fail at visit 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, make sure you have a phased-in screen fail structure. So if the patient screen fails at visit 5, the value of that screen fail should include the combined value of visit 1 through visit 5. With your screen failures, make sure you renegotiate this. Go back to the sponsor if you're upside down, if you will. Tell them, ask them what the mean screen fail average is across the study. Tell them what you're doing, how hard you're pre-screening patients, and that you want to continue with the study, but the screen fail ratio is being prohibitive to your site because there's a lot of time that you're not being reimbursed for. If you need any language on help renegotiating screen fail ratios, let us know. I can send you over some examples. So just to touch on some examples of different screen fail structures, we always obviously start with requesting reimbursement for 100% of our screen failures. No matter what, we want reimbursement for 100% based on the visit that patient or subject attended. A lot of time that's denied based on the sponsor or CRO wanting to have a little bit of shared risk with the site. So the next level would be maybe a cap. So maybe you'd cap it at 15, you cap it at 10, you cap it at 20. That's the goal. From there, it goes into the ratio. So your more favorable ratio would be, for example, 8 screen failures per 1 randomized. And then it comes down from there. 7 screen failures per 1 randomized, or 6 per 1 randomized. But dig in your heels on this one. This is an item that we escalate from the CRO to the sponsor, and we ask for a special review all the time. And we ask very respectfully, very nicely. We give our reasoning. But we do escalate, and we push it because it matters. And this upside-down screen fail ratio, number one, like I said, can prohibit you to enrolling patients down the line just because you'd be exposed to too much risk and non-reimbursable time visits. So you really dig in your heels on this, and it's by doing this as a site, it's allowing us to keep that range more reasonable and where it needs to be. So please let us know if we can help out in any way and discuss this down the line with you. But it's a very important component. Other pass-through fees and diagnostics. So make sure you apply your overhead rate to diagnostics expense. And I've had lengthy discussions with sites and sponsors on if this is ethical or warranted. It is warranted. I mean, you're processing that invoice. You're processing that patient. So if there's an X-ray, they're billing me $190. I'm adding our 30% or 25% overhead rate to that, and that's the amount that I'm going for. You want to make sure you pull all of your diagnostics tests out of the per subject budget. This is another strategy that we see from sponsors and CROs trying to help minimize their exposure. But the fact that you may be exposed to a non-reimbursed screen failure, you don't want to be exposed to a non-reimbursed diagnostics expense, because a lot of times this is going to occur at your screening visit. So you want to pull out your diagnostics or any other fixed third-party expense, and that should be a pass-through expense that's reimbursed at 100% of their occurrence, so not tied to any ratio. Some other pass-through items is dry ice, extended subject travel visits, meals, IRB fees, medical records fee is a big one that we're seeing creep up on us, printing costs, teleconferences attendance. We have a new one that we put in here. It's monitor change fee. So every time they change the monitor, we're requesting a per occurrence fee to cover the inefficiencies that go along with that change. So that was just some, some ideas for the budget and different models and strategies for how we price our budget up on a high level. I'm going to touch on our clinical trial agreements really quickly for a little bit, and a couple topics that we're going to discuss is indemnification, insurance, research injury, holdback amounts, and payment schedule. First of all is your indemnification. You want to verify that your indemnification language is favorable and reasonable. You should have some pre-approved language at your site that covers you, and you want to try to insert that into every contract and request it. It should be definitely one of your key items that you're looking at. I'm sure if you have your attorneys reviewing your contracts, it's probably a big item they're looking at. Watch out for your cross indemnification. So what I mean by that, your cross indemnification means you indemnifying the sponsor for certain situations. I'm not saying it's unreasonable, but I am saying that the reason you need to watch out for it is you have to know your insurance policy. Your insurance policy, there may be an exclusion on your professional liability or your malpractice that excludes cross indemnification. So just make sure that you circle back to your insurance policies and you verify if that is a exclusionary item on your policy. Insurance. You got to confirm that all your insurance is in line with what's in the contract. By that I mean your insurance limits. So for professional liability, you might have $2 million, $5 million, or $1 million, $3 million. For general liability, you might have a different amount. For workers' comp, you might have a different amount. Well, there might be an amount specified in the contract that's higher than what you have. So what you need to do is redline the contract and insert your true amounts. Research injury language, you have to confirm that the language is reasonable and meets your standards at your site. Holdback amounts. This is something that you got to watch closely. So a lot of times the sponsors will come out with a holdback amount of a proposed amount of 20 to 30%. So what is a holdback amount? It means they're going to hold back that amount to the very end of the study. And after every single query and everything is done at your site, then they're going to release that holdback amount. Well, that's not possible for a lot of our sites, just based on the cash flow restrictions and demands. We always request 0 holdback amount. The max we'll ever allow is 10%. And there's other ways to mitigate that, other strategies. But make sure you're looking at that and you're coming up with a strategy for your site. Payment schedule. Quarterly payments is unacceptable. We pay our staff biweekly. The cash flow at our site is biweekly. Payments have to be at a max at a monthly basis. Make sure that you're pushing back quarterly payments. Definitely try not to accept them unless it's a true case-by-case basis. But please push back. We should all be going for the monthly payments. In conclusion, be fair, be honest, and be nice. It's going to get you more money. Make sure you're calling the sponsor of the CRO contract right when you first get that budget. Feel them out a little bit, get to know them, crack a few jokes, but be serious when you're talking your business terms. If they like you, they're going to give you more money. Know your protocol. Know your protocol on a per procedure basis. You have to price it up yourself to figure out what it's really going to cost you. And not only that, when you price it up yourself, send it to the sponsor and the CRO with your initial request so they can see that you've done your due diligence and you're providing backup for what you're requesting. Know when to pass. You have to know when to pass on your budgets. It's okay to have competing studies in your pipeline. I mean, if the screen fail ratio, the budget is unreasonable, know when to pass. Screen fail. Put a lot of time and effort into your screen fail ratios. Escalate to the sponsor if you have to. Renegotiate your screen fails. Thoroughly review your CTA language and negotiate each component. You need to loop in your legal as applicable. A couple of the big items to hit is your indemnification, your insurance, your holdback amounts, and the timings of those payments. We want those to be monthly. So that was some high-level Contract and budget talk. Again, we're going to hopefully have some time at the end to field a few questions, but more importantly, if you don't ask a question, you want to talk, I'm pretty sure they'll be providing my information, so call me anytime, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So now we're going to talk about trial receivable management. Again, the goal with the strategies that I'm going to talk about now is to maximize the profit margins by driving more money to your site through receivables. We see tons of money and tons of revenue that is lost just based on the lack of renegotiations, the lack of invoicing, and the lack of communication between accounting and clinical. So between your person that's doing your invoicing and then your coordinators. It's extremely important to allow for an overall. You have to understand how much money is outstanding in order for you to have a true financial snapshot of your site. Without an understanding of the receivables, there's no way to know of what your true net income is. And without going into the accounting too much right now, I'm just, there's two ways to structure your accounting. Number one is on a cash basis, which is you're measuring your revenues based on the money as it's received. The other way is on what's called an accrual basis, which is measuring your revenues and your performance based on the actual visits that were completed within that time period or that month. So you really need to know your accrual-based revenue performance on a monthly basis to know how if you're profitable. So I would highly recommend if you're operating on a cash basis that you start to implement accrual-type measurements at your site. And this isn't meant to be a deep accounting presentation, but that was just one idea that we wanted to provide. You want to avoid lost revenue. There's a lot of sites that the communication is lost. Number one, between the coordinator and accounting, or number two, there's no process for tracking pass-through expenses. When an amendment occurs, a protocol amendment, or a reconsent, or an SAE, how does that communication come from the coordinator to accounting? Okay, so it needs to come two ways. I'm going to talk about it in the next slide. But the first way is proper communication based on recurring monthly meetings, and the second way is utilizing a CTMS platform or an Excel document or some other tracker. Renegotiate. With part of receivables, you need to be renegotiating. You need to renegotiate screen failures, any visit amounts that are requiring more time, any unforeseen expenses. Reach out to your project manager. Reach out to your budgetary contact on an ongoing basis. We speak to all of our payable contacts on a monthly basis. But keep there should be a lot of moving parts here that's continuing to be revised throughout the life of the study. Tracking receivables. This slide is, I'm going to spend a little bit of time here just because it's a lot of information on one slide. But the first thing is you got to track it. You have to have a way to track your visits as they're completed, and you have to have the way to track your pass-through fees as they occur. So your coordinator should be entering them into a CTMS platform. If you're a smaller site or a newer site and you don't have a CTMS platform, you can easily use Microsoft Excel. It's more labor intensive and it's more manual, but you can use that to start. There's a CTMS platform out there called Realtime that we use at our sites. It's an incredible platform. It was developed by a site, and it's extremely user-friendly. And that's important for us in regards to getting the coordinators to be compliant with entering the data. If anybody needs any information on that, again, feel free to reach out to me. All your visit amounts need to be tracked and entered and totaled based on what's occurred. Again, it's the coordinator should be entering that. Your screen fill reimbursements need to be tracked as well. Again, they can be tracked in Excel or via your CTMS platform, but that needs to be done on a monthly basis where you go back and if it's a ratio, you need to add back in the screen fills that you're going to be reimbursed for, because that needs to hit your receivables. So you need to be watching that on a monthly basis. Also, the point of entering the additional screen fails at the end of the month is again, if you're looking at your actual revenue over the month previous, well, theoretically, that screen fail reimbursement would be realized with that additional randomized patient. And again, we're moving fast over a lot of these different processes, but we can talk more about that down the line. Communication between finance and the coordinators is critical. It has to happen. So finance, or whoever's doing the billing, if it's the owner of the site, if it's one coordinator, whatever the structure may be, if it's us, if you outsource to us, it's something that we can do. You want to have a monthly meeting with the coordinator that's handling those studies. And I'm not talking an hour meeting. I'm talking 20 minutes where you say, you know, hey, this is what I have for pass-throughs. Did you have anything else? How are you doing with screen fails? Anything going on that we're not seeing here? Just that 15 to 20 minute conversation on a monthly basis will help increase your revenues. It'll increase your profit margin at the end of the day. You want to make sure you're watching the unscheduled visits, the SAE fees, the reconsenting, any of your pass-throughs. You want to watch your audits. Is the sponsor going to come out and audit you? Well, is there a per-day audit fee that they gave you? They might have said no in the beginning, but now that you're getting audited, go back and request that. Make sure you're covered for all your dry ice and your expenses. Obviously, your local advertising, you should be requesting more money on a monthly basis and showing the historical performance that those previous advertising dollars are producing. Watch out for your study closeout invoices and holdback amounts. A lot of times you can't invoice, for instance, on archiving fees or other closeout meetings if you might have a monitor closeout visit invoice until the end. You want to make sure that you have that task scheduled somewhere and that you're not forgetting about it. Proper receivable management, meaning sponsor and CRO outreach on a monthly basis, is critical. You should be calling them on a monthly basis to say, hey, first of all, where's my money? You said you're going to send, you know, we're outstanding. My receivables are showing that you owe us $35,000. When is this coming? You know, when are you sending out the check? What's the date? When can I assume that the payment is coming? And then, oh, by the way, how are your kids? How's the weather? Have you gone skiing this year? Again, you know, it's about relationships. It's not about, you know, a lot of emails when it comes to receivable management. And then you follow up in the email. But I would always make that call and continue the relationship. A positive relationship will move your payment up far quicker than the other sites. So it'll decrease the time of your receivables for whatever that's worth. All your payments that come in, make sure you reconcile them. There's tons of mistakes that are coming. You know, when you receive a payment from the sponsor or the CRO or drug dev or whoever it may be, you know, you have to be reconciling it and entering it into your CTMS or your Excel document to make sure it matches up with the historical procedures that have been completed. In addition to that, they should be giving you a breakdown of the visits. They need to tell you, hey, this payment was for this, this, and this. If they don't, make sure you go back to them and say, hey, I need to know the protocol number, and I need to know the itemized list of visits and pass-through fees that this covers so I can reconcile on my end. So make sure we're really watching that. I think it's hilarious when we receive a check in the mail. There's no protocol number, no PI, and no list of visits. It's just a check. You know, it's only in our industry does that happen. But this is actually an outdated report that we used to use. We now have everything streamlined through real time. But this is an example of a spreadsheet that can be used. And these are tools that we can send sites if they're not ready to implement a CTMS platform or they're not already using one. This is very busy, but it does the job. This is a study financial tracker. It shows the visits that occurred, shows the amount of the visits. It gives the total earned, the total received, and the total outstanding. Here it lists out all of our pass-through fees, so we're watching them consistently. We're able to review them with that coordinator on a monthly basis. This would show different invoices that are sent out. And then down here, we used to show the total amount of the invoices and the grant that was received, and then we would reconcile it against payments up here by just color coding it. So that's a very easy Excel way to do it. Again, it's more efficient with your CTMS platform. We recommend that, but Here's one tool. Another tool that you have to have within your CTMS platform, or Excel, or even manually writing on a piece of paper if you have to, is your receivables. You need to know what you're collecting on a monthly basis. So here you list out the study, protocol, PI. Here would tie into your grant earned, your total grant outstanding. Your grant received, I'm sorry, this would be your grant outstanding. And I just want to say I apologize if you hear my dog in the background. This is our total pass-through expenses. So all those pass-through expenses that you're billing on a monthly basis, total pass-through outstanding. And that brings me to my total outstanding money. So every month I'm adding that up and I'm looking at that, and as a site owner or a department head or a director, you'd be surprised just understanding your finances. You'll get more sleep at night. This is a rolling flash report that we provide to a lot of our clients. And what all this does, and you can use this within your CTMS platform as well, but this sums up your each study, and then it shows we have two sections, our general notes and our payment notes. General notes would be are things that would document our meetings with the coordinators. So, hey, I met with Jane today. We reviewed the per subject budget. The screen fill ratio is upside down. I sent an email to the sponsor requesting adjustment. And everything that's done, we track in our notes to really show the history and the story of that study. Your payment notes, we're more allocating these for our outstanding receivables. So these are our calls, our receivable calls to the sponsor where we're saying, hey, when are you sending that $50,000? When's it coming in? A lot of times we implement another section here that would be date of check that's going to be received and amount received, so that we know the amount of cash flow that's coming. So that's a little bit about the receivable management. Again, this is high level. We would love to peel back the onion and talk more in additional presentations or offline as well. So let's see how I'm doing on time. I believe I only have 15 more minutes. So I'm going to move quick through the end here and then allow a little bit of time for questions. PI payment guide, we're going to discuss 3 different models. I'm going to discuss a way to pay your PIs and sub-Is on a percentage-based model. We're going to discuss a per procedure model, and I'm also going to discuss an hourly rate model. The first one here is a set percentage. So this is paying your physicians based on a percentage of the grant payments, not the pass-through, just the per subject grant payments. The way that we calculate this is very simple. We first deduct out any third-party expenses that would be included in the per subject amount. So again, diagnostics procedures, you should have already pulled it out in your negotiations, but if for some reason you were unable to, or they were paying for 100% of the screen failures, maybe you left it in, you want to make sure to pull that out. Any subject stipend, you'd pull out. Any subject investigator payment that was made for a physician that covered him in certain visits should be pulled out prior to processing. And also watch out for the unblinded procedures where you have another provider that's needed. What you would do is you'd come up with that net amount, and then you would multiply that times your percentage. We find that 16% is used a lot for newer physicians, maybe 15, 16, and then upwards of 20 to 20% based on the more experienced physicians or specialty indications. Again, it's about your site and your profit margin. And every site has a different balance. But this is the per procedure method. We recommend it highly. We've used it with a lot of our physicians, and it's made for a long-term, happy, successful relationship. The next payment model we're going to touch on is a per procedure basis. So how this would be calculated is you would establish a flat rate fee for each study procedure that the provider or the PI is going to be completed. We would still calculate our appropriate budget using the percentage method, and then we would distribute the funds across the applicable procedures. For studies that are extremely lengthy for the PI, if there's, for example, for us, if there's 3 or 4 scales, we consider that average. If there's maybe 5 scales, 6 scales, 7 scales, maybe you would reimburse the over your goal percent on a per procedure basis just for the heavy labor study. So watch that closely, especially on your psych studies and other neurological studies. Only the procedures completed by the PI would apply. So again, physical exam, EKG. We typically have one for inclusion, exclusion. And then we do not reimburse our PIs on this method or the percentage method for any non-reimbursable screen failures. There's some, again, this should apply to your own site based on how you want to, keep everybody motivated. But for us, based on our baseline average site, we typically don't. Your PI fees, we establish a PI fee to every visit. So even if the sub-investigator sees that patient, so if the sub-investigator saw the patient, the per procedure protocol that are required would flow to the sub-investigator, so the physical exam, the EKG. But the PI would still get an amount at every visit for his PI fee, which is obviously for his oversight, having his name, his license on everything. So that's one way to kind of find the fair balance between the PI and the sub-I. The next method I'm going to touch on is our hourly rates. So the hourly rate obviously is just a flat hourly rate or a salary, which is highly variable based on geographic location, experience, the value that the PI is going to bring to your site. You're going to make sure that you structure all the job duties up front. So you want to make sure, actually with all these structures, whether it's the percentage or the per procedure, you want to make sure that that all the job duties are included in the job description for that reimbursement. So for things like investigative meeting, SIVs, audits, trainings, that should all be carved out in the beginning. That's part of the budget and the reimbursement. So make sure you cover yourself there, because down the line that would come up as a gray area, if you will. Hourly rates, it depends on your physician, the specialty, again, experience. We see rates anywhere from $100 to $250 to $300 an hour. And then even higher for some of our specialty physicians. So it depends on your site. It depends on your goal and the labor that you're trying to stay within. So one other thing I just wanted to touch on with this is we see that this model seems to be beneficial at a higher volume experienced site. There's a break even at every site. If you were going to pin me down and come up with a number, I would say that if the site had 30 reimbursable visits on a weekly basis, then maybe you start to look into your salary and your hourly structure. It might be more cost effective for the site, so there'll be more upside because you're obviously limiting your exposed payroll here. But with that said, there's a lot of risk. So, well, with that, I'm going to talk about some quick cons and pros for each model. Percentage-based model. So again, the payment to the PI is proportionate to the revenue. So there's tons of shared risk. You're only paying the PI based on the per visit grant payment that PI brings in with you. It's a very easy accounting method. So your budget and accounting guys, or if it's you as an owner, it's just a percentage of the grant payment. Some of the negatives, it can be difficult for the PI to understand the abstract percentage structure. Not all of them, but it depends on your provider and the person. But we have found that with some PIs, they would rather have an easier understanding of the per visit reimbursement, so they realize the real value for the labor that they're doing. Payments may be in excess of what would be completed. So what we mean there is, again, on a percentage basis, they're getting the money no matter what. So the full amount of revenue is going to flow to them on a percentage basis. There's no upside limit. So it can be, we find that it can be an inflated amount sometimes as the site grows. The per procedure basis, obviously, same thing. You have the shared risk. So you're limited regarding what you're paying the PI or the sub-I. As I said, it provides real-time understanding of the value to the provider. They can see what they're making as they're completing the visit. Procedure rates can be flexible to meet the total goal. So you can be flexible in your reimbursement based on your total budget that you're calculating. Some of the negatives are it's a pain in the butt for the accounting system. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, your rates from study to study for each procedure may be slightly different based on the goal that you're trying to hit. So you want to, that is one negative. They might say, well, why is this physical different than this physical? And then you simply explain that you have a budget within each study that you have to stay within, and it is what it is. Typically, that solves that problem. Hourly rate and fixed salary. Again, it's more cost effective if you're a high volume site. There's more upside to you, and it's going to yield greater benefits for for the experienced site. There's no doubt about it. There's a break-even point. You have to know when to make the change over. Some of the negatives, the fixed salary is it can be it leaves you exposed. It's risky. The PI is reimbursed the same regardless of the level of ongoing business, of course. We're just kind of saying the same thing over here, which is it's tons of more risk to you. Some additional thoughts. So first of all, as I touched on in the beginning, the goal of this is to educate and to help us as sites learn. BTC Network, we have a really incredible financial department that I work in, and we do all of this for sites that it makes sense to outsource. So the value that we bring in contract and budgets increases and payroll savings, it well exceeds the fee of ours. So if you ever if you're growing to that point where it makes more sense to start worrying about seeing patients, feel free to outsource to us, or there's other companies out there that you can outsource to as well. Second of all, CTMS platforms. Real-time is incredible. I recommend getting on a CTMS platform right away. If you're at the life cycle of your business where you're using Excel documents, make the jump, get into your CTMS, get your patient database going, get your financial process going. It's going to help automate your site. It's going to allow for efficient patient recruitment down the line, and it's truly going to be the foundation of your business. A couple other thoughts. If you have PIs that have large practices, large private practices, maybe you can structure a different incentive program to reimburse them a flat rate for chart review fee. So by the chart review, the PI would be reviewing patients of his own practice on an ongoing basis and identifying patients for you. So think outside the box with your budgets. This can be an addendum that would be added on to any one of your 3 payment models. So you can add things like chart review. There's other ways to think outside the box to really incentivize the identification and the recruitment of patients. Establish the PI schedule up front. Again, you want to communicate that, what is the budget for? Is it part-time, full-time? What's the exact hours? And you want to state that it's included this includes your SIVs. It includes your audits or your investigator meetings. It includes your lab reviews. And, state all that up front. We find there's a lot of gray area, obviously, with the PI responsibilities, and you want to just make sure that you're eyeing that out in the beginning. A quick example of how we pay our PIs on a per procedure basis. This is a very easy tracker. I can send it to you if you want it. We list out the procedure, we list out the number of visits, we list out the rate for each one of those procedures, and then the total per subject amount for that procedure. So for this particular study, you had physical, you had ECG, again, we have our PI fee, which the PI gets no matter what, even if the sub-I does the visit. There's a lab read, and there's a clinical global impression. So this is an example of one of the scales. So we have our total amount. So our total per subject amount, this would probably hit our percentage goal that we're trying to hit for every study. That'll allow us to maintain our profit margin of what we need to hit. And then we clearly state, screen failures that are not reimbursed. You're not going to be reimbursed. Early term patients will be prorated, and then you want to just state that it's inclusive of all the gray area. One other thing, on the per procedure basis, you may want to, or even on the percentage basis, you may want to structure it so you pay your physicians when the money comes to you. So you pay them when the money comes in, not when it's accrued on a monthly basis. Just a few things to help you with your cash flow. I am definitely over my time here. So I got a couple more minutes. So non-compete. Well, a lot of our physicians that we work for, or that work with us, I should say, we do require that they sign a non-compete. We're going to open our book of business to them. So we establish their payment budget, and then we establish a simple agreement. If anybody needs any templates of agreements, we got tons of them. But we do include a non-compete language that says, hey, you can't take my employees, you can't go around me and work with this client. I'm bringing them to the table with you, and this is a partnership. I'm exposing my book of business to you. So non-competes with new physicians that are working for you, even if you're a PI that owns the practice and the research practice, and you're bringing other physicians in, feel free to consider that as a mechanism to help secure what you've built. So that's it. Again, like I said, we were going to provide a lot of information. The goal was to help you try to maximize your profit margin with some of the high-level financial strategies. In future presentations, we may peel back the onion a little bit and get into each one. And if you ever want to consider outsourcing, again, there's tons of companies. There's a few companies out there, and we'd love to have you as well. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it back to Georgia just to field a few questions here.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Al. We did get a couple questions throughout the presentation. One of them was, what do you do when the initial per visit budget presented is at or above your fair market value costs?
Good. That's an incredible question. So I still go over what they sent us, and there could be a long discussion on ethics on that, but if I price up my budget and it's under what they're providing with their initial budget, there may be something that I'm not including. There may be a little bit of a variance regarding time that I'm not thinking of that maybe they are thinking of. So I would still request 35–40% higher than what they initially came out with, just based on the fact that there'll probably be a range. But I would still follow my same process. I would call the contact, and I would kind of say, that obviously there needs to be a lot of wiggle room, and I would see if I can get any intel prior to requesting that initial amount. But that's a great question. Thanks.
Great. And then do you also have any insight on what are the best resources to use for determining individual procedure costs?
So I don't. We've come up with ours internally. Again, our director of finance is going to yell at me for offering this, but I don't mind sharing with some people if they want to talk procedures and what they're charging. But no, it's definitely an internal measure that you establish based on based on experience pricing up budgets and conducting studies. Okay,
great. Well, thank you everyone for attending. That's about all the time we have for the webinar today. So look for our follow-up email with the on-demand status of today's webinar. We actually recorded it, so you can listen to it again. If you have any questions, feel free to email Al, or you can email me, Georgia@clinicedge.com. Great.
Thank you.